My name is Naomi, I'm 34 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm a landscape architect and a single mother to a 7-year-old boy named Caleb, my whole world, the only reason I haven't fallen apart. That night, I stood in front of my parents' 3-story mansion in Austin, holding a hospital bill showing more than $130,000 still unpaid. Behind me, the ambulance engine was still running, ready to take Caleb away if we could pay for the emergency heart surgery. I knocked on the door, my hand trembling not from the cold, but from the last bit of hope I had left. The door opened. My mother was dressed in an expensive silk gown, a pearl bracelet on her wrist. Inside, soft music played, and elegant laughter echoed from the party. She looked at me for a second, then said coldly, "Naomi, we're hosting a senator tonight. You can't show up like this." The door closed, and I was still standing there, with a tear-stained piece of paper in my hand. 48 hours earlier, my Caleb had collapsed while drawing. The doctor said if he didn't have surgery within 10 days, he might not make it. Have you ever stood at the front door of your own childhood home, knocking like a beggar, just to plead with the people who gave you life to save the life of your child? If your own family has ever turned their back on you in your darkest moment, leave a comment under this video. Hit like so I know you're out there listening. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so I can finish telling the story they never thought I'd have the courage to tell. I was born in San Antonio, Texas, into a family where every framed photo on the wall had been carefully retouched before printing. My father, Richard, founded the organic grocery chain Southern Greens, a name often featured in local newspapers, with headlines like Texas's Model Family or Philanthropic Entrepreneur of the Year. My mother, Evelyn, a former state pageant winner from 1984, is now the honorary chair of 4 charities, always appearing in photos with a flawless smile and collars tailored perfectly to Southern high society standards. But what no one mentioned was that once the lights went off, the people in those photos were so cold I sometimes thought I'd been adopted. I was the firstborn, but never the center. Ever since my younger brother Brandon came along, every eye in the house turned toward him. Brandon had our mother's eyes, our father's charming smile, and most of all, he knew how to make people feel small just by standing near him. And me? I was described as a bit rough, talked more than necessary, and was told I should learn to keep quiet if I ever wanted to marry rich. When I was 14, I built a model park for a science project, gluing every plastic tree myself and cutting the tiny walkways by hand. I brought it home, proud. My dad glanced at it and asked, "Don't you think law school would be a better idea?" Brandon. Once he wrote a short essay about wanting to be an astronaut. It was barely 3 paragraphs long, yet our parents printed it, framed it, and hung it right in the middle of the living room. I got used to being in the background. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because I didn't fit into the perfect family portrait they were trying to build. I got into the University of Oregon, majoring in landscape architecture, a decision my mom called odd, because who makes a living drawing trees? When I earned a partial scholarship, my father said just one thing: "Figure out the rest yourself. We're saving money for Brandon." I left Texas at 18 with 2 suitcases and one goal: to never let anyone silence me again. I've lived in Portland for nearly 15 years now. I built my career from scratch, starting as an unpaid intern, eventually opening a small firm of my own, hiring 2 associates, and landing contracts with community parks, schools, even a few medical centers. I'm not wealthy, but I work because I love what I create. Every courtyard, every row of trees I design holds its own story. And the best part? I get to pick Caleb up from school every afternoon, build puzzles with him, read books, plant vegetables in the backyard. Marcus and I divorced 3 years ago, but we're still good friends. He's a dedicated father who's never walked away from his responsibilities. We share custody not because a judge made us, but because neither of us can imagine life without our son. Caleb is curious like me, imaginative, but he has Marcus's gentle heart. He keeps a small notebook filled with dream parks he hopes I'll build when I grow up, Mommy. We're not well off. Everything is budgeted carefully, from utility bills to school tuition. But I never felt lacking until the day Caleb collapsed on the floor. When the doctor said, congenital heart defect, my whole body froze. I had never imagined, never prepared for the moment I could lose my child. I don't blame the insurance system. A clerical error last year, a mistake by an agent I trusted, rendered our policy invalid at the worst possible time. Marcus and I drained every savings account we had, but it wasn't enough. I called every organization, knocked on every door, and when I saw the account balance, I knew there was only one option left. I hadn't returned to my parents' house in nearly 7 years. The last time I walked through that gate was the night they threw a party honoring Brandon as Young Entrepreneur of the Year, even though I had just won a National Design Award for a school park project. I stood in a corner. No one asked what I did, where I lived, they just whispered that I still hadn't remarried. They never once asked what school Caleb went to. Not a single birthday card had ever come. But that night, I stood at their front door, surrounded by party lights and violin music, carrying the fragile hope that maybe this time would be different. My mother looked at me like I was a stain on her white carpet. She didn't ask how Caleb was. She didn't look at the bill in my hand. Her first words were about the guest list. Naomi, we're hosting a senator tonight. You can't just show up uninvited. I wanted to scream that I didn't need an invitation. I'm her daughter, and the child waiting in the ambulance is her grandson. But I said nothing. I stood still, until the door closed. When a stranger hurts you, you can forgive. But when the person who pushes you away once held your hand as you learned to walk, that kind of cold is unlike anything else in this world. I turned around without crying. Not because I was strong, but because I didn't have the strength to cry anymore. What I'm about to tell you next isn't just a story about a broken family. It's a story about people I never called family who ended up saving my son's life. While those who share my blood nearly pushed us over the edge, I thought I had lost everything. But somehow, from the ashes of that night, I finally found the place I truly belonged. That morning, Portland's sky was darker than usual. The clouds hung low like they were pressing down on the rooftops. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing a courtyard design for an elementary school in East Portland. Caleb was beside me, lost in his own world, coloring a tree castle in the middle of a grassland. I think we should plant sunflowers here, Caleb said, pointing to a corner of the page. Because sunflowers always face the sun, like how I always look at you. I froze for a moment, my heart softening. That's how my son is always finding a way to melt the weight off my chest. I reached out to ruffle his hair, about to say something when his little hand slipped off the paper. His body tilted to one side. I thought he was joking, but then his head fell forward onto the table. Caleb? No response. I jumped up, scooped him into my arms. His body was limp, skin growing cold fast. I shook him gently. Caleb, look at me, baby. Still nothing. Within seconds, I called for an ambulance. Marcus was on his way to pick Caleb up. I called him in a panic. His voice trembled on the line. I'm coming right now. The ride to the hospital felt like it lasted a century. I sat beside Caleb, cradling his head and whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. You'll be fine." But inside, I was in turmoil. I had never seen him like that before. In the emergency room, they took Caleb in right away. I was told to wait outside. Marcus arrived in less than 10 minutes, his face pale. Neither of us said a word, we just held each other's hands in the cold hallway. Nearly 3 hours later, the lead doctor, a graying man named Dr. Patel, walked out holding a file, his expression grim. I jumped to my feet. Doctor, how is my son? He nodded politely, then spoke slowly. We've run all the necessary tests. The CT scans revealed a congenital heart defect, a rare kind. It's partially obstructing blood flow in the left side of the heart, and its location is making breathing extremely difficult, especially during physical activity. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder. I tried to stay calm. So, what's the treatment plan? The doctor paused, then said, surgery is essential. Within 10 days. If not, the pressure on the heart will keep increasing. leading to respiratory failure and potential permanent damage. The good news is that he's young and in good health, otherwise, his chances of recovery are high. But he hesitated before continuing in a cautious tone. The total cost for the operation and post-op care will be around $132,000. I heard Marcus take a sharp breath beside me. I stood still. The number echoed in my head. $132,000. But I already have private insurance, I stammered. The doctor lowered his head. We've checked. The insurance company has declined coverage. They've flagged a missing section regarding family medical history, an omission from last year's renewal. It seems the agent didn't submit all necessary documents when the contract was renewed. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over my head. Last year, I had switched providers for a better premium. I still remembered the agent, a young woman, assuring me that everything was done, that all I had to do was sign electronically. I hadn't thought twice. I trusted her too much. There can't be a mistake like that. The doctor was gentle, yet firm. I understand. But what matters now is that Caleb needs surgery within 10 days. We can keep him under observation for a few more days, but without a clear financial plan, the hospital can't schedule the operation. Marcus stood up. We'll figure it out, whatever it takes. All I could do was nod, though inside I felt completely hollow. Marcus and I sat down with the hospital's financial coordinator. When they asked how much we could pay up front, I lowered my head in silence. Marcus was nearly broke. After the divorce, he had given most of his assets to me so that Caleb could have a stable home. Recently, he'd lost his job at a construction company due to budget cuts. He'd been applying everywhere but hadn't heard back. I wasn't doing any better. Most of my finances went into running my design firm and covering monthly expenses. I had an emergency savings account, about $30,000, but it barely made a dent. That night, we didn't go home. I sat next to Caleb's hospital bed all night, listening to his labored breathing. Marcus dozed off in a folding chair by the window, his face gaunt. At 3 a.m, I turned on my phone and reopened the insurance confirmation email. I reread every line carefully. There. I was a small note. Pending verification of family medical history. A line I had never noticed before. One missing sentence in a form. And now, my son's life hung in the balance. I wondered how many mothers had sat just like me, in sterile white rooms, blaming themselves for one careless signature. I laid my hand on Caleb's forehead. He had a slight fever. I, on the other hand, felt like I was burning from the inside out. The next morning, Marcus woke up before I did. He placed his hand on my shoulder. I'll call a few old friends, try to work something out, maybe sell the truck. I nodded, but inside, another decision was already forming. I opened my notebook and listed everyone I had ever helped, worked with, or who once said, "If you ever need anything, just ask." I had no time to hesitate. And then, at the very end of the list, I saw the name I had never wanted to write again. Richard and Evelyn Holloway. My parents. Maybe I had once sworn I'd never go back. Maybe I thought I was strong enough to live without them. But I wasn't the same girl anymore. I was a mother. And I was ready to trade every ounce of pride just so my son could live. I don't remember exactly how I booked the ticket. I just remember kissing Caleb's forehead before stepping out into the hallway, unable to look back. Marcus squeezed my hand, his eyes red. I'll stay here with him. You go. If they have any decency left, they'll understand. I nodded, though my heart was numb. I no longer believed in their compassion. I only hoped my son wouldn't have to pay the price for their coldness. The flight to Texas passed in silence. I stared out the window for all 4 hours, thinking only of Caleb lying among machines, without me by his side. Every time a flight attendant offered a drink, I shook my head. I wasn't hungry or thirsty, just crushed beneath an invisible weight on my chest. When the plane landed in Austin, I rented a car and drove straight to the upscale neighborhood where I once called home. The mansion was 3 stories tall, ivory white with a black tiled roof, a wrought iron gate, and hydrangeas lining the walkway, always perfectly trimmed. Everything looked pristine, at least on the surface. I parked outside and turned off the engine. In the rearview mirror, I barely recognized myself. I tied my hair back, wiped my eyes, pulled Caleb's medical file from my bag, and stepped out. From the backyard, I heard piano music and laughter. A voice from the microphone was saying something about outstanding achievements and a new milestone for the Holloway family. I knew today was the celebration for Brandon's recent private jet purchase. That jet cost $4.2 million, according to his boastful social media post 3 days ago. I climbed the steps and rang the doorbell. A house staff member opened the door, eyeing me from head to toe, likely assessing my outfit. I wore nothing flashy, just a dark coat, jeans, and worn boots. But that look reminded me how, in this house, appearance always came before character. "I need to speak with Mrs. Evelyn Holloway," I said quietly. "I'm Naomi, her daughter." The staff member hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Please wait here." I stepped into the foyer. Everything was as I remembered: shiny walnut floors, crystal chandeliers casting light across the ceiling, the faint scent of expensive perfume lingering in the air. But what I felt wasn't warmth. It was a suffocating kind of estrangement. Within a minute, my mother appeared at the top of the stairs, draped in a silk robe, wearing a 3-tiered pearl necklace. She looked down at me, her eyes sharp and cold. "Naomi?" Her voice was cutting and surprised, like I was the last thing she wanted to see that day. "What brings you here without notice?" I swallowed hard, stepped forward, and held out the file. "Caleb is in the hospital. My son has a congenital heart defect. He needs emergency surgery. The doctors say we have 10 days. I've tried everything I could, but I don't have enough. Please, I'm begging you, help with part of the cost. Just a portion. I'll pay it back." Her gaze remained unchanged. She stepped down 2 steps, paused, then spoke softly, but each word cut like a blade. "Naomi, you should have married someone more established. This was your choice, not the family's." I stood frozen. "This is your grandson's life, Mom." She shook her head, arms folded in front of her chest. "We have guests. You shouldn't be disturbing Brandon's big day." Before I could say anything, Brandon emerged from the living room, holding a glass of champagne. That same smug expression, the familiar self-satisfied smile. "You made it just in time for the party? Or are you here to beg again?" Brandon scoffed, his eyes flicking to the folder in my hand. "Don't turn your kid into a sob story like one of those online clickbaits, okay? No one here lacks money. We just don't like being used." It felt like someone had slapped me across the face. No one moved. The guests avoided eye contact. Some even turned away. Only the music continued, as if nothing had happened. I bit my lip, struggling to stay composed. Then I lowered myself to the floor. I knelt in the grand foyer, knees pressed against the icy marble, holding the folder up to eye level. "I'm not asking anything for myself," I said, my voice choked. "I'm only asking for Caleb, your grandson. I'll sign anything. I'll repay every cent. Just please, help save my son." The piano music stopped. There was a brief silence, just enough to hear glasses clinking in the distance. Evelyn stood still for a moment. She glanced at the guests nearby, then turned to a server. "Call security." I stared at her, confused. "Naomi," my mother said, her voice colder than before. "If you don't leave, I'll have someone escort you out. This is private property, not a place for outbursts." Security approached, polite but firm. They didn't touch me, just bowed slightly. "Miss Holloway, please step outside." I got to my feet. My legs were trembling. I didn't cry. I wasn't even angry anymore. Just hollow, so hollow I hardly recognized myself. As I turned and walked away from the estate, I heard Brandon casually joke with someone. "Every family's got one. At least we only have one." I didn't look back. I walked straight to the car, still clutching Caleb's medical file. That night, as I drove back to a small hotel near the airport, I didn't think about my mother. I didn't think about Brandon. I thought only of Caleb. And one single truth: I would never beg again. From now on, I would fight alone. For Caleb. For me. For everyone who's ever been cast out by their own blood. I booked a ticket first thing the next morning. The earliest flight from Portland back to Austin. As the plane, I lifted off the runway, I stared out at the gray sky, my chest tightening with an unshakable dread. I had tried to sever ties to that house, to the people who made my childhood feel like an open wound. But now I had returned not to seek acceptance, but to plead for my child's life. When the plane landed, I skipped the hotel and rented a car, driving straight to the old estate. The neighborhood still held its cold elegance. White gravel lined both sides of the road, hedges trimmed so perfectly I could picture my mother summoning the landscaper 3 times if one rose branch was even slightly uneven. The mansion stood there, imposing, as if it were the pinnacle of curated success. But to me, it had never been a home. I parked at the gate, stared through the windshield, palms damp with sweat. I reached into my bag for Caleb's medical folder, clutching it tightly to my chest like a fragile shield. The front door opened just as I stepped onto the porch. A house staff member walked out, scanning me from head to toe with a blank expression. "May I ask who you're looking for?" "I'm Naomi," I replied, voice rough from lack of sleep. "I need to speak with Mrs. Evelyn. I'm her daughter." He hesitated for a second, then nodded politely. "Please, come in." I stepped into the main hall. The chill of the air conditioning grazed my face, sending a shiver down my spine. The scent of my mother's signature perfume still lingered in the air, a scent that always felt foreign to me. Moments later, she appeared at the top of the stairs. Evelyn Holloway, hair perfectly styled, not a crease in her blouse, a string of gleaming pearls on her wrist. Her eyes drifted over me like I was an uninvited stranger. "Naomi?" Her tone was even, devoid of warmth. "What's going on? You didn't call ahead." I took one step forward, unable to meet her gaze. "Caleb has congenital heart disease, Mom. The doctors say he needs surgery within 10 days. I tried everything, but the cost is overwhelming. Can you help us?" I held out the file, my voice cracking. "Even just part of it. I'll pay you back. There's no one else I can ask." She didn't glance at the documents. She merely crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "Naomi, I've told you before, life is about choices. You chose to leave this family, chose to raise a child on your own, chose a career with no stability. Now you're in trouble, and you want the family to bail you out?" I stood silently. Not surprised, just stung by the familiarity. Every word dug into old wounds I had tried so hard to bury. I still tried to hold it together. "I'm not asking for me. This is your grandson. Caleb is in the hospital, struggling to breathe, burning with fever. I'm begging you, if you've ever had even a shred of love for me." I couldn't finish. She had descended 2 more steps. Her eyes were colder than I'd ever seen. "Naomi, you're being dramatic. I'm sorry, but we're hosting an event today. Brandon just finalized the purchase of his private jet. A lot of distinguished guests are here. You shouldn't show up like this." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at her, and I saw clearly the emptiness behind those polished eyes. I still didn't give up. "Just look at the file. It's real. Caleb doesn't have much time." Just then, Brandon walked in from the lounge, holding a champagne flute. His suit was navy, his hair slicked back, his smile phony. "Oh, you're here," he said, stretching his words. "Heard Caleb's sick, tragic." His tone dripped with mock sympathy. "But don't use your kid to guilt-trip everyone again. We all make our own beds." I turned to him, too stunned to reply. He went on, indifferent. "Stop using your kid as a charity case, Naomi. It's getting exhausting." My knees buckled, my head spun. I knelt right there in the grand hall, on the freezing marble. I held the folder high, with all the strength I had left. "I don't need dignity. I don't need validation. I just need someone to help my son live," I said quietly. "Look me in the eye and tell me that a child's life is worth less than a party." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Then my mother shook her head and turned to a nearby staffer. "Call security. I heard every word. I stood up, trembling. I couldn't breathe. That mansion had never been mine, and now I knew it would never be Caleb's either. I don't remember how I got out of there. I only remember the sound of each step echoing through the brightly lit hall. When I stepped outside, I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't need to. I walked straight to the car, set the folder beside the driver's seat, buckled in, and started the engine. This time, I didn't cry. The pain had already hit rock bottom, and from that place, I knew I had to rise not for myself, but for the child waiting for me to return. Caleb didn't need a prestigious family. He needed a mother who wouldn't fall apart, and I would be that person no matter what. I returned to Portland on a cold, gray morning. The wind from the Willamette River swept through the leafless trees outside the airport like a warning. I barely spoke to Marcus during the drive from the airport to the hospital, gripping Caleb's medical file as if loosening my grip would make everything fall apart. Caleb was still in the intensive care unit, his face pale with exhaustion. I sat beside the bed, took his tiny hand, and whispered, "Mom's home, sweetheart. I'll find a way." Marcus handed me a cup of coffee, his voice hoarse. "Did anyone help?" I just shook my head. He didn't ask again. We were used to silence not because there was nothing left to say, but because we understood each other's despair too well. That night, as I sat alone in the family waiting room, my phone buzzed quietly. A message with no name appeared, only a few lines. "Tomorrow, 9 m, office 303. Come alone." I stared at the screen for a long time. No unknown numbers had messaged me recently. No signature, no explanation. Just a single instruction. In any other circumstance, I might have deleted it right away. But now, I had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I put on a dark coat, tied my hair back, and went to the address in the message. It was a granite office building in the city center. The revolving glass doors led into a wide, marble-floored lobby. A young receptionist directed me to the third floor. Office 303 was a law office, but when I stepped inside, there was no sign, no receptionist, only soft yellow lighting and a woman waiting for me. She wore a light gray shawl, her silver hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, hands resting on a finely carved wooden cane. I guessed she was in her 70s, but her eyes were sharp and bright behind. Thin framed glasses. "I'm Doris Green," she said, her voice slow but firm. "Have a seat, Naomi." I paused for a moment. That name wasn't unfamiliar. Doris was Evelyn's biological mother, my grandmother, whom I had never met. My parents had almost never mentioned her. I didn't recall ever seeing a photo of her in our house. To me, she had long vanished quietly from the family tree. "You're the one her daughter once called a burden," she said gently, "and someone who's been watching over you from afar for years." I sat down in the chair across from her, full of doubt. "How do you even know what's going on with me?" Doris leaned forward, fingers interlocked. "Because you're the only one in this family who still carries a shred of humanity. Where do you think your mother's coldness came from? From the choices she learned when she was young. And because I don't want those mistakes to repeat for another generation." I stayed silent. I didn't know what to feel. Shocked, distant, unsure. Doris reached into her leather bag and pulled out a folder and a tablet. "This is my private trust. It has nothing to do with Evelyn or Richard. I established it when I turned 60, for causes I deemed worthy." She placed the tablet in front of me. The screen read, "Transfer authorization, $150,000. I blinked. "I can't accept." "You have to," she cut in. "Not because I want to save you, but because Caleb deserves to live. And if you refuse out of pride, that's the most selfish thing a mother could do." I gripped the armrest of the chair. My voice nearly broke. "Why are you helping me? I've never even called you Grandma." Doris sighed. "Because you're the last good part this bloodline has left. Because you had the courage to kneel before the people who abandoned you just to save your child. And because I was too late to be a good mother to Evelyn. But it's not too late to do the right thing for you." I couldn't hold back the tears. I lowered my head, quickly wiping away the ones streaming down my cheeks. Not because of the money, but because, for the first time, someone in this family saw me as a real human being. Doris pulled out a sheet of paper and a pen. You just need to sign this. The money will go straight to the hospital. No repayment, no debt. But there's one condition. I looked up. Promise me. When you're able, use what you have to help someone else who's drowning in despair, like you are now. Not out of duty, but from compassion. I nodded, eyes stinging. I promise. She gave a small nod. Then go. Caleb needs you alert, not sitting here. I stood, bowed slightly. I didn't know what to call her. Didn't know if I should hug her. In the end, I just whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Doris smiled, a little sadly. Not seeing. Recognizing. I've known who you were for a long time. I left that office with a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. As the elevator doors closed, I clutched the papers tightly and exhaled deeply. For the first time in days, I felt something other than despair. Hope. But not from where I expected. From a stranger within my own family. Someone who had never held me, never sent a birthday card, but reached out just as I was falling. I returned to the hospital and walked into Caleb's room with the confirmation letter in hand. Marcus looked at me, eyes searching for an answer. I said nothing, just placed the paper on the table. He picked it up, read it, then stayed quiet for a long time. "Where did you get this money?" I replied softly. "From someone I never expected. Who believed in me. Now it's my turn to believe in myself." He looked at me for a long while, then nodded. Said nothing more. But in his gaze, there was something I couldn't name warmer than any words. We notified the doctor immediately. They scheduled the surgery. Caleb would have a chance to live because someone chose not to abandon me. The surgery lasted 6 hours. I sat outside the operating room, gripping the plastic bead bracelet Caleb had made for me last year for my birthday, with the words, "Best mom ever." Every time a doctor or nurse passed the glass doors, I jumped to my feet, but they only shook their heads. It wasn't over yet. Marcus didn't say much, but I knew he was praying. He sat not far from me, eyes shut tight, hands trembling on his lap. Between us, no more words were needed. The shared fear was enough to pull two broken people closer in silence. When the doors to the operating room finally swung open, I stood up, unsure if my legs would hold me. Dr. Patel stepped out, pulling down his mask. His face showed clear exhaustion, but in his eyes there was a glimmer of relief. "The surgery was a success," he said, his voice calm in a way that felt like a blessing. "We removed the mass, compressing the heart and repaired the deformed valve. Caleb will need a few weeks of monitoring, but he's a real fighter." I collapsed into the chair. All the tension I'd been holding in for days seemed to fall on me at once. I buried my face in my hands. I didn't sob, just let the tears fall in silence. Marcus placed a hand on my back and gave it a gentle squeeze. When I was allowed to see Caleb, he was still unconscious. His tiny face was covered in wires and tubes, but his breathing was steady, his skin pinker, and his soft hand lay above the blanket as if waiting to be held. I leaned in and kissed his forehead. "Mom's here now, and I will never let you go through pain alone again." I started replying to backlog emails, finished overdue designs, and sent them to clients with a brief apology. No one complained. In fact, many sent messages of concern. Some, quietly, transferred funds to help before I could even say no. I kept a small, soft-cover notebook, recording each name and detail I refused to forget. Sarah, an old college friend, sent $500, her entire wedding savings. Malcolm and Linda, the elderly couple downstairs, sold their old pickup to contribute $1,200. Travis, a college intern from my old studio, handed me a $300 envelope with a note. "I don't have much, but Caleb deserves to live." Each name was a debt of kindness. And I knew one day I'd repay them not just with thanks, but with actions, using the thing I do best, creating spaces that help people feel whole again. After Caleb recovered, I didn't rush back into my old routine. I took time to reflect on my career, the work I'd done, the opportunities I missed, the sacrifices I made in exchange for temporary security. I decided to shut down my old office, the one I used to share with a small nail salon and a print shop next door. I wanted a fresh start, not to prove anything to anyone anymore, but to pursue what made me feel truly alive. I found an abandoned wooden house on the outskirts of Portland that used to be a community library. The roof sagged in places, weeds had overtaken the path, and the inside was thick with dust, but I saw potential. Not just as a workplace, but as a space that could restore the spirit. I applied for a renovation permit and personally redrew the entire design. Every detail was intentional: large windows for natural light, reclaimed wood walls, a meditation garden out back with gravel paths, and sage growing along the fence. I named the new studio Elan Healing Spaces, not just a name, but a promise that we would build environments that help people heal, both physically and emotionally. Just a few months after reopening, I got a call from the city planning office. They were bidding out a redesign of Greenleaf Park, the largest urban park in the city, which had fallen into disrepair after decades of neglect. They were seeking a design that centered the community and reconnected people to nature and to themselves. I stayed up many nights working on the proposal. I didn't just submit blueprints, I included a personal letter. I wrote about Caleb, the people who helped me through the crisis, and how I wanted to transform public spaces into sanctuaries where anyone could find a moment of peace in a chaotic world. 1 month later, I was selected. The project was worth $5 million a budget, far beyond anything I had ever dared to imagine. But what moved me most wasn't the number. It was the handwritten letter attached to the contract from the head of the city council. "We didn't just choose your design. We chose the heart and vision behind it." I sat quietly in my new office, the contract on the desk in front of me, hands trembling slightly. Caleb was playing with Lego bricks in the corner, looking up every so often with a wide smile. I used to think I had to earn status, recognition, win at the game my family always valued. But in the end, I realized the only thing I ever needed was to live in alignment with what I believe, and to never turn away from the people who reached out when I was barely holding on. I still remember that morning when construction on Greenleaf Park officially began. Portland's sky was a crisp blue, filled with energy, the sound of bulldozers, hammers, and conversations among architects and engineers filled the air. I stood in the clearing, blueprints in hand, listening to the first steps of something coming alive. Not just a park, but a dream rising from the rubble. Caleb sat on a temporary wooden bench nearby, reading his favorite comic book. Looking at him healthy, glowing, I could hardly believe that just a few months ago, he had been lying in a hospital bed, breathing as lightly as thread. I didn't want anything more. I thought the storm had passed, and what lay ahead was just the road opening wide in front of me. But everything changed after just one afternoon. That day, I returned to the studio after a city council meeting and found my inbox flooded. Some people had sent me an article. Others congratulated me. Some asked, "Is this really you in the picture?" I didn't understand until I clicked the link. The article headline read in bold, "A mother left begging, a billionaire family partying." Below it was a photo of me, pale, eyes red, kneeling in the grand foyer of the Holloway mansion, holding out Caleb's medical records as a security guard stood nearby, ready to intervene. The image had been taken from surveillance footage and somehow leaked online. The article didn't mention names, but the details: the largest organic grocery chain in Texas, a son who just bought a private jet for $4.2 million, and a mother who left home at 18, now an architect in Portland, were enough for anyone to piece it together. I don't know who leaked the footage. Maybe a server who witnessed it, maybe a disgruntled guard. But one thing was certain: the truth was no longer buried. Within 3 days, the hashtag numbered Justice for Caleb swept across social media. Posts telling my story appeared on Reddit, Twitter, Facebook. A single mom in Atlanta posted an emotional reaction video on TikTok that racked up over 2 million views. People began digging into the public image of my family. Articles once praising Evelyn and Richard Holloway as model figures of America's elite were dissected. A YouTube investigative channel posted a breakdown of their wealth accumulation, paired with the cold behavior shown in the leaked footage. Brandon felt the fallout first. A tech investment firm that had just announced a strategic partnership with him publicly canceled the deal, citing a values mismatch. His LinkedIn page disabled comments after hundreds of people left broken heart emojis and lines. Like, "This is the guy who laughed," while his sister begged to save her child. Southern Greens, their grocery chain, long proud of its community health mission, faced massive backlash. Suppliers began reconsidering contracts. Customers posted videos canceling memberships, dumping products in trash bins, calling it an anti-hypocrisy protest. I was invited to morning shows, talk panels, podcasts. Women's magazines reached out for in-depth features. I declined most. I didn't want to turn Caleb's pain into PR, but I knew some truths need to be told. Not to shame anyone, but to let those who've been hurt see themselves in the story and know they're not alone. At a community forum on the culture of silence in elite families, I spoke briefly. I didn't name anyone. I just told the story of a mother who once sat in a hospital hallway at 3 a.m., praying someone in her family would answer the phone. I spoke of the quiet heroes, and of a grandmother I never met who chose, even in silence, to stand with me. After that program, I received a brief email from a woman named Laura in Minnesota. "I've been hiding the fact that my own mother disowned me for getting a divorce. But when you said, 'Not everyone who shares your blood is family,' I felt free." I read it, set my phone down, and sat in silence for a long time. Not because I was emotional, but because I understood. No matter what happened, I would never return to being the woman who bowed her head and begged for a place in someone else's picture of what a family should be. A week later, I got an unexpected call from the assistant to the executive director of Southern Greens. Her voice was low and hesitant. "We'd like to invite you to a private discussion with the board." I didn't go. I wasn't looking to reconcile. I wasn't looking to sue. I just had no desire to engage with anyone who had once placed brand value above the life of their own grandchild. I kept working. Greenleaf Park began welcoming its first visitors after Phase 1 was completed. The media picked up the story. Local families sent thank you letters. One elderly woman wrote by hand, "Just sitting on the bench under the red maple makes my heart feel at peace." Caleb sometimes joined me on visits to the site. He would draw trees, flowers, ponds, then ask, "Mom, do you think these places really help people heal like you say?" I hugged him. If they give themselves the chance, then yes. I wasn't chasing justice anymore. I had gained something more precious: freedom. The freedom to live, to love, to build a life not dictated by anyone else's definitions. The truth had come to light, and in the middle of that storm, I didn't feel loss. I felt growth every day, every hour, with every decision shaped by the same hands that once trembled in a hospital hallway. That morning, I was working in my office when the receptionist tapped gently on the glass door. She handed me a plain white card, no sender listed, just one printed line: "Mr. Richard and Mrs. Evelyn Holloway, waiting in the third-floor conference room." I stared at the card for a long while. I couldn't tell whether the tightness in my chest was cold or hollow. Nearly a year had passed since the day I was cast out of the mansion with Caleb's medical file in hand. Not a single message, not a word of concern. And now, they had shown up at my workplace. No appointment, no apology, no business card. Just arrived. I stood and walked slowly to the conference room. As I opened the door, sunlight from the large window behind them backlit their figures, making it hard for me to adjust at first. Richard sat upright, hands clasped on the table, trying to maintain his usual composed expression. But his silver hair had grown in more than I remembered, and deep fatigue marked the corners of his eyes. Evelyn sat beside him, head slightly bowed, wringing her hands in the folds of her beige linen dress. She no longer looked like the woman who once descended the mansion's staircase with pearls and a perfectly practiced smile. She now looked like a mother clinging to her last shred of dignity, even after denying the child seated before her. I didn't offer them a seat they were already sitting. I didn't pour water. We were no longer acquaintances, let alone family. I was told you had something to discuss, I said calmly. Evelyn lifted her eyes, framed by pale makeup. She looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, Naomi, we need to talk. I didn't reply. I simply set my briefcase down, opened it, pulled out a thick document stack, and placed it neatly in front of them. Richard glanced down. The man who once breezed through 100-page contracts with ease now looked visibly shaken. It was the deed to the mansion in Austin, the very place where I had once knelt in desperation. I had repurchased it through a third-party channel for half its market price, thanks to Southern Green's rapid collapse and the unpaid bank loans they couldn't escape. That home belongs to me now, I said evenly. And I know why you're here. Richard remained silent. He drew a deep breath, clearly weighing his words. But Evelyn could no longer hold her composure. Naomi, we're family. I know there were misunderstandings, mistakes, but we can't stay estranged forever. I looked at her directly. You once turned your back on me and your own grandchild. No one in your family objected. I'm simply living by the values you taught me. Protect your dignity. Her voice began to tremble. The house, if it gets repossessed, will have nowhere to go. The bank has already started the process. We just need more time. I nodded. I know. That's why I've already prepared this. I flipped one sheet forward and slid it across the table. This is a lease agreement for the mansion. 1-year term, renewable. But there's a special clause. Richard furrowed his brow. What clause? I didn't look away. From the day you sign this, I am your landlord. You may not call me your daughter. No parental titles. No private contact. No access to Caleb. No personal requests beyond the terms of the lease. I am the owner. You are the tenants. The room fell into a heavy silence. The ticking of the wall clock felt unnaturally loud. Evelyn suddenly began to cry. She lowered her head, covering her face. You really want your own parents to live like strangers? You'd let us be evicted from the place we've lived in for 30 years? I clasped my hands on the table. I won't put you on the street. I'm offering to lease back the same house you once used to stage a perfect family facade. You'll still have a roof. Just not one you control. Richard leaned back, eyes half closed. Naomi, if you're doing this to get revenge, you've already won. There's no need to drag it further. I tilted my head slightly, but didn't smile. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to live by the hard lessons I learned, many of them from the two of you. No one has the right to force someone to accept a love they never received. I placed a pen on the table and slid it toward them. I don't need a signature today. You have 3 days to decide. Otherwise, I'll proceed legally. No one spoke. They stood slowly. Evelyn was still crying. Richard gave me one final look, then turned and walked away. The door closed. I remained alone in the room, not triumphant, not angry, just clear, crystal clear that the circle had closed. I was no longer the outsider begging to be let in. I held the keys now. And I knew the boundaries of my heart. No one crosses them without earning their way back. My new home sat tucked beneath golden maple trees in the outskirts of Portland. Not far from the city, but quiet enough to hear leaves brushing the porch in the afternoon, the breeze. I had designed it myself, drawing inspiration from all that Caleb and I had endured: open space, plenty of sunlight, a backyard full of lavender, and a little art nook just for him. But what touched me most was the day we moved in. Caleb ran through the house shouting, "Mom, is this really my room? It has a huge window just like in my drawings." I knelt down and smoothed his hair, feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. Deep down, I understood. Healing doesn't come from contract numbers or project launches. It comes from watching your child laugh under a roof that holds no more shadows. One early fall morning, with dew still clinging to the wooden fence, I drove out to the countryside where Mr. and Mrs. Malcolm lived. I parked in front of a weathered tin-roofed house. Mr. Malcolm was sweeping leaves. Mrs. Loretta sat trimming wild daisies into a wicker basket. When they looked up and saw me, they smiled just as gently as they had the day I carried Caleb into their clinic. I stepped out with 2 cups of hot coffee and a thick envelope. After a few warm exchanges, I invited them inside. No small talk. I got straight to the point. I know our home isn't fancy, but there's a ground floor bedroom that looks out over the lavender garden. It's quiet enough for you both to rest, and close enough for Caleb to finally have real grandparents nearby. Mr. Malcolm went quiet for a moment, his hand reaching for Mrs. Loretta's as if searching for agreement. She turned to me, her gentle brown eyes brimming with tears. "You don't owe us a thing, Naomi," I smiled. "But I owe Caleb a real family." They agreed to move in the following week, and from that day on, laughter returned to the afternoons when Caleb sat wide-eyed listening to war stories from Mr. Malcolm, while Mrs. Loretta knitted pillows for our living room. The empty spaces I once believed could never be filled slowly began to heal through such simple, quiet joys. I didn't forget Sarah, the friend who had rushed Caleb to the emergency room that fateful night. When I visited her one afternoon after the park project was announced, she was still working part-time at a daycare inside a rundown apartment complex. Her eyes lit up when I asked about her dream of starting a co-op preschool. I placed a small wooden box on the table. Inside was an investment plan, a signed 2-year lease for a space, and enough funding to get her started without needing a bank loan. Sarah looked at me, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. "Naomi, why do you trust me this much?" I gently held her hand. "Because you were the first person who didn't ask for reasons. You just acted when Caleb needed help. That preschool, a place where children are treated with kindness from day one, is exactly what this city needs." Her tears fell onto the floor plan of the future classroom. And then I thought about the other children, those like Caleb who I hadn't been saved in time. I contacted the Children's Hospital and proposed a scholarship fund called Caleb's Heart to support families with children born with congenital heart defects. Not just for medical bills, but also mental health counseling, housing support during treatment, and long-term sponsorship if the child wanted to pursue medicine or nursing in the future. The first thank you letter I received came from a single mother in Wyoming. Her little girl was only 4, in the recovery unit. In her letter, she wrote, "I was ready to give up. But because of the scholarship named after your son, I have hope again. Thank you for turning grief into someone else's chance to live." One Friday afternoon, just as I was clearing my desk to go pick up Caleb, a special delivery arrived. The sender was a law office in Dallas, with a brief handwritten note. "Final documents from Mrs. Doris Green." I froze. My eyes blurred as I touched the raised red wax seal bearing. Her name. Inside was a handwritten letter, the script soft but decisive. The first line caught in my throat. "Naomi, if you're reading this letter, it means my time has ended, but the path you're walking has only just begun." I sat down, hands trembling, and continued reading. "I've watched you since the day Caleb was born, from the tiny local articles to that video of you being pushed out of the mansion gates. You didn't know, but I was standing behind the second-floor curtain that day. I saw every tear. I once believed that legacy was passed down through medals, estates, or titles. But at the end of my life, I see clearly only compassion leaves a true legacy. You've become the legacy I always wished this family would produce." The letter wasn't long, but I had to pause several times as my throat tightened. At the end, there was a short, handwritten note, almost like a caption. "In the bottom left drawer of my desk, there's a photo. It's of your mother as a child, cradling an injured black puppy. Back then, Evelyn still knew how to feel compassion." I placed the letter in the back drawer of my shelf. No audience, no medals. Just me, the late afternoon light slanting through the glass, and a silence that wrapped gently around a heart finally stitching itself back together. I've come to understand some departures are irreparable losses, but others leave behind a silent blessing. And Doris gave me that. A blessing from the only person in the family who ever truly saw me without needing a title. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the living room window, dancing across the open pages in Caleb's lap. My son sat cross-legged on the soft rug, chin in his palm, his bright eyes fixed on me. I closed the children's book gently and set it down. "Caleb," I said, my voice steady, like I was about to open a door more meaningful than any fairy tale. "Today, I want to tell you a true story. There are no princesses or dragons, but there are real heroes." Caleb tilted his head, eyes wide with curiosity. I smiled and began, my heart quieting as it always did when I remembered the days we survived. "When you were born, I had nothing. No home, no money, no one willing to stand beside me at the hospital. It was just you and me. Then one day, your heart gave out. It was too weak for the fast, heavy rhythms of the world. I held you and ran to the hospital. But they told me, no insurance, no qualifications, nothing except a child who needed saving." I paused. Caleb sat still, listening. He gently squeezed my hand, and I continued, slowly stitching each memory back into place. But then a friend of mine, Sarah, didn't ask a single question. She just said, "Get him there." Then there was an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Malcolm, who opened their door in the middle of the night and welcomed us like I was their own daughter. And then there was a woman I'd never even met before, Grandma Doris, who stepped in at the right time. She never bragged, never demanded anything. She just saved you with the kind of humanity that the people who shared our blood didn't have. Caleb looked up at me, his voice barely a whisper. "So, they're our family, Mom?" I nodded, wrapping him in my arms. "Family isn't who gave birth to you. It's who stays when you need them most. It's who shares your pain and laughs with you when the pain is gone. That's what real family is." That night, after Caleb had fallen sound asleep, I stood quietly by his window. Outside, the night breeze gently stirred the lavender branches in the yard, their soft scent drifting in like a silent blessing. Doris's final words echoed in my mind. "You've become the legacy I always wished this family could have." The following week, the Rehabilitation Center for Children with Heart Conditions officially opened its doors. It was a project I had nurtured for nearly 2 years, starting with $150,000 from Doris, then gradually expanding thanks to the Caleb's Heart Fund, supported by those who had once received kindness, and even by strangers who simply believed in doing good. The building had been renovated from my family's old estate. The same classic tiled roof, the same white limestone walls, but now, there were no longer slamming gates in my face, no guards pushing me away. Instead, the air was filled with the gentle hum of wheelchair wheels over the stone path, the giggles of children, and the comforting scent of cookies from a kitchen designed to feel like home. On the wooden sign at the gate, bold letters read, "The greenhouse, because love heals better than blood." Below that, in smaller print, "In loving memory of Doris Green." On opening day, I wore the seafoam green dress Caleb picked for me, standing in front of the guest seating area, quietly watching children play in the newly planted garden. Sarah stood beside me, holding a bouquet, her eyes misty. Mr. and Mrs. Malcolm were also there, warmly welcomed by the staff to serve as emotional support advisors for other parents. After a short speech, I stepped up to the podium, microphone in hand, feeling a strange sense of peace in my heart. "Not long ago," I began, "I knelt at this very gate, begging anyone to save my son's life. The doors didn't open, but life opened other doors. And today, I've returned not for blame, not for justice. I came back to give." Applause followed, but I barely heard it. I stepped down and walked into the crowd. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, ran up and pressed something into my hand, a bracelet made of red thread. "Are you the one who built this house?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. I knelt down and gently brushed her hair back. "No, sweetheart. I just cleared the path. You and the other kids, you're the ones who are building it." That day, Caleb and I walked through the garden behind the center. He ran barefoot across the red brick path, laughter bubbling from him like music. When he stopped in front of a small wooden heart-shaped sculpture, I stepped closer and read the engraving beneath. "To all the children with brave little hearts." Caleb looked up at me. "Mom, Is this our home? I nodded, pulling him into my arms. Yes, baby. And it's a place where kids like you can heal, be loved, and take charge of their own story. There was a time I thought happiness meant reclaiming what had been stolen. But now I understand. Real happiness is when you turn your own wounds into shelter for someone else's pain. And even though, on paper, I am no longer part of that family, I have found a true family in my heart. With Mr. and Mrs. Malcolm, with Sarah, with Doris, with Caleb, and with every child fighting through the hardest chapter of their young life. If you've made it this far, maybe you're like me, once believing that blood was sacred, until your heart was cast out of the place you called home. But through this journey, I've learned something. Family isn't where we're born. It's who holds us when the world turns away. I'm not sharing this story out of bitterness. I'm sharing it because I believe someone out there is quietly bearing wounds inflicted by those they once trusted most. And if my story can help even one person find their voice again, then every moment of pain I lived through was worth it. What about you? What do you think truly defines a family? Who in your life would stay not out of blood obligation, but out of love and decency? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please share your story because it's those stories that keep this one alive. And if stories like this one have touched something deep inside you, don't forget to follow the channel. There are so many more journeys of family, gratitude, betrayal, and healing still, waiting to be told. Thank you for walking this path with me. And if there's one thing I hope you carry with you after this story, it's this. Sometimes it's through the cracks that the light finds its way in.